You come from a nice big house on a hill. I come from a place where the poor need to steal. I can't look you in your face without thinking of history. On the same day that they killed Emmett Till, August 28th, end of the summer. Might go the wrong way, see the depth of your comfort. Say the wrong thing, making him suffer. What was his sin? He was the wrong color. Lie to me, lie to me, lie to yourself. Point to your enemies when you need help. I can see how your policies help all your friends. You make money on killing while you play pretend. Lie to me, lie to me, lie to your people. You hold the law so you can't be illegal. Lie all the time cause you know it's a drug. Maybe a sign.
Hello, friends and comrades. We are back with a mini episode of Outernational after a short hiatus. I had a very crazy spring with performances and travel and, of course, teaching. And so now that I'm done with the school year, I am very happy to be on summer break. And we will be back with more new episodes of Outernational. This is a special live episode, and this is with the brilliant Samora Pinderhughes. And we recorded this live at the Press Play Fair at Pioneer Works. I talked to Samora about what it means to be an abolitionist. We discussed his work collaborating with incarcerated folks through his organization, The Healing Project. And we talked about how art can help people process the horrors of the prison industrial complex. It was a short and sweet interview, but it packs a powerful punch. I promise there's a lot of alliteration. And so here's my conversation with pianist, composer, and multidisciplinary artist Samora Pinderhughes.
Break that, build back, hold fast, hold fast, hold fast, hold fast, break that.
My name is Amrita Kadambi, and we're doing a kind of a mini live edition of a new podcast that I started this year through the Working Artist Fellowship here at Pioneer Works. It's called Outernational. And the idea of Outernational is that we talk about the role of music in collective liberation. And so that is very intersectional. It's across many, many struggles. And actually, one of the important things that I try to highlight in the podcast is the interconnectedness of struggle, and not look at, music and revolution as this sort of fetishy thing from the 60s that happened once, but who are the folks who are right now working towards this in many different ways. And so I'm very excited to have Samora here, Samora Pinderhughes, and I'll give you a more formal introduction in a second. But I do want to acknowledge something at the top of this segment, or the first segment of the Press Play Fair, which we're very excited to be here for. It came to my attention this week through a friend of mine who is an artist who performs here a lot, Charmaine Lee, and it came to our attention that Suno AI was one of the funders. And I feel this is important to acknowledge, and we have been engaging with Pioneer Works about this, and Suno AI is a music creation tool, AI tool, we can call it, quote unquote, but it poses existential threats to artists and independent artists. And so for an independent arts fair, I think we should acknowledge this. I will be tabling later at Palestine Handmade's table. I'll donate my fee to our folks in the West Bank who we're fundraising for. It's not to say anybody else needs to do anything, but I'm grateful to Pioneer Works for the opportunity to engage with this in the future, because we have been talking about actually discussing this at some point. So just want to say that up top. And yes, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have Samora Pinderhughes here. So interdisciplinary, let me see if I catch them all. So we have artist, pianist, vocalist, filmmaker, sculptor, you do install, printmaking, and you do work that deals with the experiences and the terrors of the prison industrial complex and structural violence. And so I know we have a short time, so I'm going to just dive in. Something that I was watching a video of you, and you said work should make people live differently. So artistic work should make people live differently. How they see the world, how they understand themselves, or maybe you're describing what you want your work to do. So I was wondering, is there work by artists or elders that modeled this for you, and what kind of transformative impact have artists had on your thinking?
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks so much. It's an honor to be with you. Admire you so much for your musical and political work and community work. And lovely to be with everybody. Welcome. 100% behind you. Not a fan of the AIs. Very much a fan of the human beings. And I think that is connected to what you're talking about in terms of living in from the perspective that um, I think oftentimes about how in regards to artistic work, I mean in general, but particularly in regards to artistic work and in relationship to community building and community sustaining work, that it's not just about what we do, but how and why we do it, and that's equally as important in the details. And so within that context, I think when I think about artists that model this idea of living differently, or that have come across their work and been inspired myself to live differently, it's not just about necessarily the sound or the content of the work, but it's also about a holistic um, experience, as much as close as you can get, particularly to people that that have that lived before I did, but as holistic of an experience as possible, to be inspired by their approach to how their work could actually transform the world. I think about people like Harry Belafonte,
Mm-hmm.
like Paul Robeson,
Yes.
Nina Simone, obviously, and artists who, not, of course they made songs with certain themes, but they also were intimately involved with movements. They also, engaged in knowledge production in a sense through the content of the work. That it
Yes.
wasn't
Yeah.
just about, okay, this song is about this thing, but actually it's navigating or investigating the circumstances in which we live. I think about like a album called Back to the World by Curtis Mayfield,
Mm.
which is a concept album that basically takes the character in the album is just returning from the Vietnam War and is going
Mm.
through the days of coming back to the United States as a Black person. And so those are the kind of records where I think I was inspired and learned kind of like the possibility
Mm.
within a body of work that could really make you think differently about the circumstances of the world around you, and also try to model something akin to that.
So I guess that the follow up then, all of those artists for me too. I mean, because I think for my own music making practice, this is the imperative: is you have to leave the room different than you came, and it's got to make you like shift your thinking when you look out into the world, and your role, your own role in it as someone, as a listener or audience. How do you feel? What's your approach in your work to doing this for the viewer, for the listener, for the audience, or I guess how conscious are you of that and how you're presenting your work?
Yeah, I think for me, there's two different, I guess, interlocking relationships I have to kind of thinking about putting something in front of people. One is like the before it's in front of the people, which is just like about the how and the way in which it's made, and trying to um, like actually um, create a set of circumstances around the production of the work that is like, that's why I don't even like production. I don't even know, around the making of the work that is um very much in keeping with what the work says it's about. It's kind of like a, the same version as I want the things that I say in the world to be how I act. I try to make in the same way. And then I think with regards to when it's when it's with people, not even in front of, um, I think I try to do a a lot of thinking about space, which I think
Mm.
is part of what also led me to working out in other disciplines in addition to music. Because as you know, especially with performance, it's a very ephemeral thing, which can be wonderful in that it's like you're able to bring it all these places, but you have very little control often of over the space,
Yeah.
and in all the ways, like in terms of your interaction with the people that are putting it together in terms of how the space sounds, what's here. We have having these conversations like, is it going to sound good or not? Also, like, do I have the ability to, if I move someone in the performance, can I move them towards something? Part of that might have to happen outside of the realm of the performance.
Right.
But do I have the control to be able to do that when I'm going town to town? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Whereas if I'm able to participate in the creation of the space itself and then put the music in it, then I can create, I can contribute to all those different aspects of the relationship. And that also includes who is invited into the space, like who's showing up, what is the price point, do people feel welcome in this part of town, who's what's the dynamics of that situation, and why, and can I interrupt that or work with that, and or so those are the kind of things that that's the stuff that's kind of outside of the art itself. But also oftentimes as artists, when we don't have a say in that second part, we can do as much as we want to do with the material, but then it can still we can still not really have the effect that we want to have.
Yeah. I mean, you're making albums, you're making very collaborative, very gorgeous albums, and as a pianist and a vocalist, but you also, I've seen like at the kitchen, your altar building, the sculpture, the filmmaking, and kind of how all of these things are telling a story. And being that you're talking to people about the prison industrial complex and structural violence, I'm very interested in the Healing Project, which is a long-term project and organization, how it came into being, because I think something for me that is so impactful about your work is it's not just, this is music about this. You are doing things that have material impact, like working on people's legal cases, not only sharing their narrative, but doing things that have kind of a real material impact. So I'm curious, what is the Healing Project? How did it come about? And I'm curious, did it come out of the music making experience or vice versa? But tell us a little bit about that project.
So the Healing Project is an organization that I am the director of, that I founded in 2014. And when I founded it, it wasn't supposed to be an organization. It was just a project. It was actually, I think the first thing that led me to where I am with it was actually a failure, which I think is a really interesting. And I try to be really always start there, which is that it was originally supposed to be a performance project, which would involve me going around the country and doing audio-based interviews with people who had dealt with the prison industrial complex and what I call the before, during, and after of the carceral system. So before is like people who are dealing with structural violence in their communities, the consequences of policing, immigration systems, all that stuff, environmental racism. The during is obviously during while you're in prison. And then the after is what they call returning citizens, or people who have gotten out of prison but are still so restricted from living the lives that they deserve to live with dignity and opportunities. And so, I was talking to people on all different ends of that spectrum. And the idea was to do these audio interviews and make a performance piece out of that. And when I first tried to do that with a certain subset of interviews, mostly that I first did with friends and kind of community members, it really didn't work for two reasons. One was it couldn't, the material was too much to be held inside of a 1 hour performance piece. It needed to be a context where it could breathe. And so I was like, it actually needs to be inside of a space where people can come in and out and they can experience it in accordance with the time and the energy that they really can relate to it. And the other element was it became a community project because I really didn't want to do the documentary model. Not to say every documentary is like this, but many documentaries are time-based, interview-based things where it's like, we're going to be with you for this thing. Then when we're done with the documentary, bye-bye, we're going to go do whatever our awards run,
It can be a bit extractive.
Yeah. And I really didn't want to do that. So from the beginning, I said, with everybody that I was connecting with, you tell me what you want this to be, and it became more than I expected, which was not just that they were sharing their different experiences with me, but they also would say, I want to make a film. Or they would say, I'm incarcerated and I make art every day, all day in the cell. Can I mail it to you?
Wow.
Will you
Yeah.
put it up? And this is a common thing for people that have relationships with incarcerated people, because many of them are amazing artists and they don't have any outlets for their creativity inside. And so it's just it's like a thing that, a lot of people want to show their work. So accepting that process, it just became something different, which at first was basically just a series of artistic projects, and then eventually grew into this organization where we kind of do two things in tandem. One is we create works of art collaboratively with people who have experienced the carceral system, in every discipline. Um, and then and we kind of do that in like the format of narrative change work. And then the second thing is we do this kind of more structural work, which sometimes can include or involve trying to have something to say around abolition and policy work, the big picture stuff. And then sometimes it's very individual in terms of with our incarcerated artists in particular, that we try to provide them with artistic materials, services. We try to work on their cases when we can. We try to provide them with as much support as we can while they're going through their situations. And we will sometimes even be involved in their parole cases, these different kind of things. But it's all very much like, for me, it's like call and response. That's what I always say. It's call and response. So it's whatever you tell me you need the most, or you want to talk about the most, or whatever, then provided that we can go there with it, we will.
I love that the way of thinking about it as call and response. I mean, that's very deep in so many ways, like the history of art in America is black art, black artists, and going back to the origins of the music making tradition. So the call and response is very deep. But I think in general, when artists are engaging, or anyone is engaging in sort of activist work or community organizing, it has to be like that. It has to be call and response. You don't decide, oh, the community needs this, and so therefore I'm going to serve and provide XYZ. You have to respond to what people are telling you their needs are before. And the same as a musician, you have to listen. You listen, then you create. And so that's a beautiful. I love that way of thinking about it. I mean, this process is so intimate. It sounds like you're doing this ethnographic work where you're working with folks both in carceral systems and in communities affected by violence. I'm sure there's a lot of sharing of very deeply personal traumatic stories and experiences. And I was wondering, so you're making work with people collaboratively, but you're also making work where, like, I've seen, I've actually used your work a lot in my teaching at Brooklyn College, Masculinity, which is such an incredible piece of music and film, and Process is another one, so beautiful, where you're doing the storytelling process. And I feel it's already hard enough to sort of write about your personal experiences. So I was wondering how you handle communicating the experiences of people who have been through these traumas, and what's the care involved? How do you approach that kind of process of going from sort of interview and collection and conversations to, making these artistic works?
Yeah. I think anytime that I'm making stuff with people, then it's always going to be during the process itself, just moving it back and forth, really trying as much as possible, which sometimes it can take some time when there are restrictions on the communication, but taking the time to try to really, be in communication about what we want this thing to end up as. Usually in regards, particularly with the healing project work, the stuff that I will like make with other folks with language in it it'll either be directly in their own voice, or it'll be basically like the text will be co-written and then translated, and then we will put it out together. So for instance, with this piece that recently I released with Keith Lamar, who's on death row in Ohio, like the audio is a recording that we did together of him speaking, and then we kind of scaffolded it with all this music. And that was, a process that we went back and forth with. But for me, it's always important that with those kind of pieces in particular, as much as possible, it remains in their voice. And then there's the other side, like you said, of all the other set of music that I make, which is definitely informed by certainly the work that I do in that set of relationships and practices, but it's also the personal stuff. Like those two songs you mentioned come from very particular stuff that I want to talk about. That maybe something will come out of an interview, but it'll be like, oh, but that's something that personally I need to work through, and that's when usually the songs will happen. And I try to also do that in kind of almost different containers of projects, so that just there's a consistency there, and also so that I can almost something I love about like the album format, for instance, is that it's almost like a novel instead of a short story. Like you have the space to be able to really navigate and explore very complex things, and so there are certain topics like masculinity. I could make a whole record about just that. Maybe one day I will.
Yeah, I mean it's a powerful video, and yeah, I guess that's where we were talking before we came up here about what it is to make socially engaged work, and we can kind of think about these topics as sort of like outside of ourselves. Okay, there's artistic work that's personal expression, there's artistic work that is sort of this justice oriented or protest work, and it's outside of ourselves, but it never is, because we live in these systems. So something like masculinity, exploring kind of the vulnerability of the expectations of men, and in particularly black and brown men, of what masculinity is and how these cycles play out for men. I'm sure, yeah, you're impacted by these same systems, so you're hearing a lot of stories, but it sounds like you're not necessarily like, okay, this person told me this story and now I'm writing these lyrics. It's like you're getting transformed by hearing these stories, and it's about how it relates to your own experiences in your life, and then you're writing. So that seems like a much more holistic kind of process, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And it's both and. So then we dance between these things, and also with in the other way too. Like for instance, with the Healing Project Choir, which is a bunch of different artists who make work that we kind of create. Like I put together to sing a certain set of works, but over time, it's like everybody's making things around shared experiences, but very personal. But we will go and play each other's gigs and be like, "Oh, you're talking about this," and I'm sure you do the same with collectives you're in. It's like we're in a shared experience, as you said, we're all filtering that as artists through our personal experience. And I think it's a very beautiful thing to be able to be in conversation around that and also support each person's personal output about these shared experiences.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So you're an abolitionist. And we hear this word a lot, especially maybe in 2020, people started getting more familiar with this word. I could also consider myself an abolitionist. I hope everybody should, or maybe is in the process of understanding what that means. What does abolition mean to you? What does it mean to be an abolitionist? Because I do think we have sort of a vague mainstream discourse around it. But for you, what does that mean?
Yeah, I love that question, and particularly because I'm also currently like very fascinated also with the period of abolition of slavery. So I do think I do like, since abolition is a very broad term, like you can abolish many different things. So certainly, like, to be specific, I mean, all, obviously it's situated within many other things that I think are, as you were saying, within in the beginning, interconnected struggles, right?
Yes.
So liberation for Palestine, liberation for Congo, Sudan, liberation for, people, oppressed people around the world, liberation from racial capitalism. Like all those things are in, the umbrella, like umbrellas and interconnected struggles with what we're speaking about in relationship to abolition, which is the abolition of the prison industrial complex, which specifically doesn't just involve the prisons, but also the apparatuses that function within the prison system and allow the prison as a structure to be reified, which I think that part is actually just as critical of a part to me. So for instance, many people, when they think about prison abolition, will think about certainly like the jail, and they'll even think about the police, but they won't think about the courts. And the reason I use that as an example is because one of the things, I observe as an example is people that will like really, want to confront systems of policing, but when there's a police incident, they think that the justice for that will be a court case.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's fine if you want that, but that's not an abolitionist perspective because the court system is a part of the prison system, right? So for me, it's trying to understand what not just all these interconnected structures, but also what there's this term that Ashawn Crowley, who's like an amazing artist, scholar, he says, otherwise possibilities, my favorite phrase. I love it. And this is what I like really believe in, otherwise possibilities, because part of, I think, why people get stuck is that even when they see something's not working, they're just like, this is all we got.
This is how this is. This
And
is
I'm
the
just
system.
like, no, it's not.
These are the tools.
Yeah, like it's really not. It's like super not. On both ends, because number one, we can imagine something else, and also all of this stuff did not exist forever. So that in and of itself, whether or not you judge what came before in whatever way you do, it is proof positive that it's not permanent, And so for me, I'm interested in, this analysis of all these interconnected structural violences, but also in practicing in the here and now these like experiments in otherwise possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really resonates with me, especially as artists, this idea of like, if you're an abolitionist, your job is to imagine how things could possibly be. And I think that is something that makes artists particularly good abolitionists. And we should, I think more of us think of ourselves this way as presenting, doing this work of imagining. That's what being creative and imagining is, the work of an artist. And so I think we're kind of ideally suited to that. Does everybody step into that role? Not necessarily, but I think this is something that we can and should be doing.
100%.
Yeah, and I mean, some of these things are obvious, some of these things are not, but obviously the prison industrial complex, as you're saying, and racialized capitalism, how this connects to other things, right now, obviously, we are bracing in New York for a certain kind of the ICE paramilitary invasion. I mean, I live in Sunset Park, it's already very much underway. That this is a for-profit industry, so you can't disconnect the prison industry from the detention center industry, right? So there's a profit motive for rounding people up and jailing them. And, I just feel like this bears repeating. We have nearly 2 million people or more. This statistic might be from 2024, being held in prison. So that doesn't include ICE detention centers. America is only about 5% of the global population, but we have 25% of the global prison population, right? So you see how that profit motive it's so obvious in a way. But I think people, if you think, oh, prison is for people who are criminals and then go to jail, but if you understand it from this view of racialized capitalism, you realize, okay, what's the profit motive? Well, is it just we have a lot of criminals in America more than anybody else? I mean, if you apply any critical thinking to that question, you will know immediately that that's not true, right? As we're going to wrap up pretty soon, but on this subject of how interconnected all of these issues are, the struggles, the scaffolding of all these systems kind of working together. You know, when I think about bell hooks, like the ultimate for me, you know, imperialist, capitalist, white supremacist, patriarchy, each one of those pillars needs the other one to continue to exist. You start to tackle one, and others can fall. We are in such dire straits right now as a country, as a world. What are you focused on heading into 2026? And maybe that's related to the work you've been doing over the last 6 months at Pioneer Works, and then you're about to go to MoMA and do present this work. So there's the work part of it, but how are you thinking about heading into the year? You know, we're in revolutionary times. How are you preparing? What are you doing? What are you thinking about as we face this down?
Yeah, it's definitely a great question, and I'm sure, like everyone else, the place to start is just uncertainty and grief, in the sense that like I was talking about it with another organizer friend of mine a couple of days ago, that I think that from a strategy perspective and also from an emotional perspective, it is like important to acknowledge how much we're losing, because it's almost like if you have a loss in your own life, like the more you resist that acknowledgement, the longer it takes you to be able to do something with it or about it. And so I think that really it is important to have that feeling and that analysis of the circumstances, and also to understand the places in which I think we really like can have the possibility for impact, versus where we would ideally like to be able to have it, but maybe it's not realistic. Like an example I would give for that is there are certain circumstances where when I think about the military might of the United States, I'm like, I don't know how far we would get in certain contexts with violence because of surveillance.
Yeah.
But when I think about boycotts and strikes, that's something that can work.
Yeah.
So I think the more that we are able to be strategic around that, as in combination with like how we want to move together as a community, I think that's going to get us closer to where we need to go in really being able to be a united front. I think that solidarity is going to be a huge thing in 2026. And what I mean by that is people finding that, being able to stand very strong in what they believe in and who they are, and all of that, and also build alliances. I think we need each other, and we need power in numbers, and we need power in shared coalition building across interconnected struggles. And I think that we've seen that in certain contexts recently, like in the election recently, where that can really be super powerful, and especially with really good organizing behind it. And I'm also interested in things that we can build and sustain for ourselves that can last. Because I also think a bind that we have is, even as we know that things don't work or are unfair or are exploitative, and this is certainly the case in the arts, we still don't build other things that we then can build power with, or have what we need with, that we then can opt out. Like, Spotify is an example of that.
Yes.
AI is an example of that, where it's like, we need to opt out of Spotify right now. Artists are in a little bit of a bind because audiences, number one, we don't have strong alternatives, but also audiences don't know how to support or what to support, or maybe refuse to support like alternatives to that. So that puts artists, particularly ones without, much income or power, in a bind. So I think if we're able to work together to build alternatives that have some legs and can last, that's the freedom that's what's going to bring us real freedom.
Yeah.
Because then we don't have to be in the in-between place of saying, I really don't believe in this thing, but like I can't completely reject it.
Yeah.
because
has
we
to be
don't have the
somewhere to
alternative.
turn.
Yeah, always, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of our antecedents, our ancestors, like created that allowed them to do the things that we admire. It's not just that they were able to it's not just that they were able to like get off the bus. I'm black, right? So it's not just that they were able to boycott the bus, it's that they drove each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they were able to do that. So I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like speaking on the interconnected nature of all these things, part of what has been helping to push the Spotify boycott is also the geo block of Israel, of like a lot of artists saying, you know, I no longer want my music to be streamed there, and then that sort of got more, okay, I can make that choice. So then what if we left Spotify? You know, so these are.
Yeah, and the ICE, and the fact they were running the ICE ads.
And they were running the ICE ads. So all of these things are so connected. And the last thing I'll say is I think this point about grief, about needing to allow time, not only to like, you know, you learn about what's going on, accept it, but you have to grieve. Because grief is like without that process, it's very immobilizing. And I think it's very overwhelming right now. What should we be doing? I think processing grief is the number one thing that helps mobilize people to move forward. And you can do that communally. I spoke to Saul Williams recently, and he talks about how every concert is an organizing space. Every concert for me is a place to process grief. So I think we might have to end there, but thank you so much,
Special
Samora.
plug, speaking of concerts to process grief, she's playing here on Tuesday. Come to the show.
Yes, I'm playing here on Tuesday, and Outernational is a podcast that you can check out on. I mean, right now it's not on Spotify. It's on Apple. It's on YouTube. Yes, I will try to figure out what the alternative is. Check out alternative streaming services. The episode so far, we had Greg Saunier from Deerhoof talk to me the same day that they left Spotify. We'll have a panel conversation with Saul Williams that's going to come out pretty soon, and there's 4 episodes, and Omar Ahmad, who is playing on Tuesday here, Palestinian American sound artist and composer. That episode just came out with Omar in November, so check out Outernational. And thank you, Samora. Thanks, Pioneerworks. Thanks, Press Play, and thank you to you all. Thank you. Well, that was my all too brief interview with the wonderful human being that is Samora Pinderhughes. We'll definitely get together again for a full episode soon because we had so much to talk about that we didn't get to in this brief interview. But in the meantime, consider this your appetizer. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to hear more like it, please subscribe and follow on Substack at Amrita Kadambi under Outernational. You can also rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Outernational is produced by Z Park and engineered by me. To play us out, here's Samora's incredible track, Hold Fast, with the Healing Project Choir from the Black Spring mixtape, which you can find on Bandcamp. As always, love and solidarity.
You come from a nice big house on a hill. I come from a place where the poor need to steal. I can't look you in your face without thinking of history. On the same day that they killed Emmett Till, August 28th, end of the summer. Might go the wrong way, see the depth of your comfort. Say the wrong thing, making him suffer. What was his sin? He was the wrong color. Lie to me, lie to me, lie to yourself. Point to your enemies when you need help. I can see how your policies help all your friends. You make money on killing while you play pretend. Lie to me, lie to me, lie to your people. You hold the law so you can't be illegal. Lie all the time cause you know it's a drug. Maybe a sign, maybe a flood. Break that, feel bad, break that, feel bad, break that, feel bad, break that, feel bad. Hold fast, hold fast, hold fast, hold fast, break that, feel bad. in control of the food and the water. You built up a hole where you hide all your dollars. You show up and hold all my cousins for ransom. Years on a bail, calling them monsters. Years of abuse, played to your conscience. I cannot afford to be waiting on options. You like telling stories and selling me chances. Then in the morning you calling the locksmith. Lie to me, lie to me, lie to yourself. I can't abide it, it's killing my health. I can keep it all quiet inside of myself while people are dying in prisons and jails. Lighters and burn it all down. Life is a riot with boss on the house. I won't suffer in silence, yeah, I see too much. Now I can't allow it. Break that, build back. Break that, build back. Break that, build back. Break that, build back. Hold fast, hold fast, hold fast, hold fast. Break that, build back. 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 Hold fast, hold fast, hold fast, hold fast. Break that, build back. Break that, build back.